can join the conversation via Facebook on the Buncombe County Facebook page. And then what I will share with participants is that they are free to join the comments. They can chat if they have questions or if they have words of affirmation. However, we are not going to respond to a lot of the questions until the final third of our conversation. So after introductions,
You're sounding like a robot.
I'm sounding like a robot, okay. Sound like a robot, okay. I may have to hop off, let's see.
Right now you're on 2 screens also.
I do know that, and let's see.
Sometimes that gives feedback and then causes that to happen.
Exactly. Let me.
You look so happy, Shane. Because none of your kids have hopped on the screen yet?
Right. Well, they were all, you know, so the 3 dogs and the 3 of the kids were off screen just a second ago.
Is this any better?
Yes.
Yes.
Wonderful. Okay. Hopefully I stay out of the bunker. Thank you. Okay. So each of you will get about 6 minutes to talk, and then we'd like to have 2 minutes to open up for any of the other panelists to ask you a question, or if there is a chat question that comes in, I would like to just throw that out just so that we can keep a little bit of a dynamic and open dialogue. Once everyone has their 6 to 8 minutes of presentation plus comments, then I'll throw some questions out to all of you all for about 8 minutes or so, and then we'll open it up and we can all collectively respond to questions that I will share. And you know, some of them I may just direct depending on the subject matter, but they are all open for everyone to respond to. And so this is also pretty much in parallel with what we put together in this last minute guide. So I think we are at 1 o'clock. And we have, okay. So good afternoon and welcome all who are joining. We're gonna give it about 2 or 3 minutes for others to get on the webinar. We know that there were some technical issues with our link, so want to make sure that as many folks are able to join the bulk of this conversation today for Let's Talk Mind and Body Connection and Social Justice in the Time of COVID. So just a couple more minutes for all of those who are just now getting on. We do want to be give a little bit of patience, as we know there were some technical issues with folks accessing the event link. So thanks for everyone's patience, and thanks for all of those who have been able to join today's Let's Talk Mind, Body, and Social Justice in a Time of COVID. Today, we are joined by a panel of esteemed, local, and really important connected change agents in building resilience here in Buncombe County. In today's discussion, we'll open up with Reverend Reverend Deacon Glenda McDowell of Asheville, North Carolina. We'll be followed by Dr. Jen Pitts, who is a longtime resident of Asheville and also a leading connector to NAMI, and also has served on the Buncombe County Health and Human Services Board. We'll then follow with Shane Lunsford, who is a practice administrator with the Mountain Area Health Education Center, particularly within their mental health and behavioral services unit. And then followed by Martha Alcalo Williams, who is a student and parent coordinator with Asheville City Schools. And she also directs their equity programming and is a regional director with the Race for Equity Institute, REI. And then followed by David Thompson, who is with Buncombe County Schools, and he directs student services for our county schools. So I welcome all of our participants, and a quick moment in that during our panelist discussions, towards the end of their individual presentations, we'll have one or two questions that we'll open up from our panel, as well as from our attending community. And towards the second half of our conversation, we'll then welcome for you all, our community, to share any questions or any observations that they'd like via the chat. So thank you all, and let us proceed. So I will now give the floor to Deacon McDowell. Thank you.
Well, greetings and blessings to you all. And thanks, Zoe, for the upgrade. Hopefully there's a check in the mail.
Pardon me.
When Zoe asked me to be part of this, I was wondering, what did I have to offer? So I'm going to stay in my role as the deacon. Deacons go out into the world, kind of capsulize what's happening, and go back to the church and report. So I can honestly say that we are in our Easter season. You know, we celebrated Easter and we found out the church is not those four walls. We are in fact the church. And to my young people, I'd like to say, no man knows the hour nor the time. Get on with your life. This ain't the end. You know, we always get an awakening. And when I say that we're in the Easter season, we know very clear of the crucifixion of our Lord and Savior. But also we know that whenever Jesus appeared, it was not peaceful. In fact, he said, I didn't come to be peaceful. I came to kind of interrupt, to be a disruptor. And if you notice, when Jesus came into cities, into villages, into town, he did indeed disrupt. He came, and remember when he took all of the fishermen and they left their net? There was somebody waiting on fresh fish that evening that they did not get. He disrupted. There was something to talk about. There was change. So we're living in a period of disruption. We're living in a period of recognition that we had two commandments from our Lord. One, have only one God, and the second, love thy neighbor. We're finding out who our neighbors are, and they're not always the ones next door. And when I meant that we were living in the Easter season, we noticed that others are joining the cry from across the world. So when they spoke in their own tongues and they understood in their own language, we see that just in front of us every day. So to say that we're doomed or we're going through something awful, no, we're just going through life. Jesus wanted to see if we were paying attention. And now that your eyes are open, what will you do next? And for those of you that said, I expected her not to preach, I only know what I know. And I will close with amen.
Thank you, Deacon McDowell. Also, I'm curious if you may, in one of the other points of knowing what you know, many of the community does recognize you within your capacity as a mediator. And so right now, as we are in a time of such intense discussions that may, disrupt how we feel and how we act, is there anything that you may be able to share with our community from your lens as a mediator in how we may go forth in our day-to-day?
Well, the first thing when I mentioned that we were taught to love our neighbor, first you have to have respect for self before you can respect that neighbor, and know that neighbor doesn't always look like you, talk like you, sound like you, in fact, uses words that you probably would not use. But now that we are coming out of the darkness into the light, we must be prepared to hear the truth. You see, there's your truth, my truth, and the truth. And the truth is what we always put under the carpet. But now that we say that we are woke and our eyes are truly open, then we have to have real dialogue. Real dialogue brings conflict. You have to be prepared for that conflict. And we know conflict is as normal as breathing in and breathing out. It's a part of everyday life. I would say if you're going to be open, now is the time to be open. No resentment. Say what's on your heart, because it is the heart that has been hardened. And now that the eyes are open and the ears are hearing, it is an opportune time for us to begin that dialogue.
Do you have any nuggets of how we may actually begin that dialogue, and that beginning that dialogue within and then also within community with our neighbors?
I think there are all sorts of opportunities now. Everybody wants to talk. They're talking on Facebook. They're talking on Instagram. They're talking everywhere. So the fact that we can talk, just start a conversation. I don't know about most of you, but some of my best conversations have been in the line at Lowe's buying flowers. And why did you buy that one? And how can I take care of that one? You know, it also starts with a smile. When you walk by somebody, just acknowledge them. What we're trying to get back is to being human, each one of us. And you have to see me as human. So begin the dialogue. You know, have people over. You know, we can't visit right now because of the pandemic, but call up somebody, do something. And right now, when we first started this, people were saying, do something nice for a friend, do something nice for people that you don't know, do something. I go to my mailbox every day. I notice ain't none of you sent a check, but then that's another line, but do something nice. Get on out there. This is your world. This is your time. And again, to young people who see this totally differently than we do, who see this. And for us old people, please get out of the way. Do I always
Well, Deacon, thank you for those reminders. I think there are some great takeaways in terms of doing something. And so we would say that doing something, obviously, right now, is also very powerful in digital mode, and the reminder for all of us to be human. Now, are there any of our panelists who may have a question towards Deacon McDowell before we welcome Dr. Pitt? I see we do have a question that's come into the chat. Someone is asking, how would we tackle the tough question of race in the do something?
You tackle it. You've been walking sideways, going around it, talking out of both sides of your mouth. This isn't the first time we started to talk about race. We talk about it, yet we don't talk about it. How is it that you can't talk about it when it's in front of you every day? You want to have a conversation, set an agenda, get people together and start the dialogue. Appreciate that it's going to be hard. Appreciate that you might leave with your jaw a little tighter, but you left a little more, with a little more knowledge of the other person. You know, this isn't hard. We have choices. We make choices every day. Is our choice to be in conflict constantly, or is our choice to have a healthy, thriving community? And you know, when we talk about race, it brings up all those other things that we don't want to talk about. We don't want to talk about economics. We don't want to talk about voting. We don't want to talk about a lot of things. And the reason we don't get to them is we always put race in the beginning. Yes, it's here. Yes, we need to talk about it. Just do it.
So thank you for the reminder again to just do it. Now, I want to welcome Dr. Jim Pitts. Dr. Pitts, if you can please share your background and your career in mental health and wellness, and also how you've been doing it to improve the connection and social engagement opportunities for men of color.
I'll try not to speak on all of that, but it takes up too much of other folks, but it'll come out. I'm Jim Pitts. I was a college teacher. I'm a sociologist by training, and a sociologist basically studies how we organize as a society. My particular introduction to that topic was through professors who looked at how American society is organized and has been. But my original introduction to that came through my parents, because I was one of 4 sons born in the North in Chicago, but my parents would take us south during the 50s, where they originated. And my mother in particular would, through lots of little family stories, educated me about race, but it was a way of talking about how American society is organized. It's not just skin color. It is, as Glenda said, it's about economics. It's about things that you can feel comfortable talking about if you're Black, if you're talking to other Black folks, but in some cases it was dangerous or considered impolite to discuss things, how things were organized with whites. In high school, I had a teacher who told me I ought to be grateful for being born in America. And that kind of woke me up, because it was something like 7 in the morning, we were at this class. And I told her that I'm not grateful, but I'm going to make the best of. I'll make the best of it that I can. Let me silence this thing.
Call from 155925464.
And by the end of that very day, this teacher spread around that I was a communist because I wasn't grateful. And I realized then that it was kind of dangerous in a way that my mother had tried to explain to me much earlier. But it intrigued me. Things that are dangerous are not necessarily things you ought to avoid. You just have to try to find out more about what's dangerous about them. And essentially, she was upset that I had taken exception to the notion that what my ancestors had gone through in terms of the violence of being introduced into American society for 300 years and lynched and imprisoned for the next 100 years. It was so-called freedom, but there was a tremendous amount of violence. And I, by the age of 12 or 13, let alone 17, I knew that. And that was kind of my introduction to college in a way, where I could go study these things, but my mother had prepared me. And here was a teacher who was either willfully ignorant or just uninformed, and said I ought to have certain attitudes. Well, I didn't have those attitudes because my mother had been educating me, and we've been visiting Louisiana since I was 4 or 5 years old. And I knew there were certain places I couldn't go, that we stayed out in the country where our folks lived, but there's certain places we didn't go because Louisiana was a very dangerous place, and some would say still is. So my background is to grow up Black with parents who came to the North because North offered less violence, not nonviolence, but less violence from whites. And they wanted us to be educated. My mother would talk endlessly about the way American society was organized. And my daddy would do that as well. When we were visiting Louisiana, and I was, say, a little bit less, about 13 or 14 years old, I overheard my father engaged in a conversation with the older relatives. And during that conversation, a friendly white man came along the road and stopped in. Turns out that after every Sunday at his church, he loved to come and really talk with my relatives who lived out in rural Louisiana. It was genuinely, he enjoyed the people. But Brown versus Board of Education had upset Southerners by saying desegregation of education ought to begin. He was not angry, but he was, this friendly white gentleman, trying to figure it out because he had grown up under segregation, which is not just separation, it is white supremacy on top of non-whites. That's fundamentally what it is. And so this particular day, as they all sat out on the porch, and I was just listening to the folks talk, the friendly, genuinely friendly white man said to the group, he said, this Brown versus Board of Education thing is going to be difficult to live with. He said, I've learned, growing up that we're supposed to be separate, but he says, I think I've figured it out. He said, when we die, you will lose your color and become like me and acceptable to God. My father just chuckled. I mean, openly just chuckled. And he said, don't be surprised if in order to get to heaven, you might have to look like me. Now, I offer this not as if we're dealing with truth in a literal sense, in a factual sense. But what I learned was that my father was a very perceptive man, and he recognized the puzzlement in this very friendly white man. And, but in a friendly way, he just said, if you turn that around, you might understand things a little bit better. That's what he was saying. So I'm not going to say much more about myself other than as an adult, I've studied and taught about race and social class and how American society is organized. And along the way, I also learned some things about mental health in America. One of which is that there's a lot of shame in about talking about mental health. People often don't feel very comfortable admitting that either they may have some mental health problems or that some member of their family may have mental health problems. And I've learned that stigma is the word we use for shame. And when I recognized stigma, I said, this applies to race and it also applies to mental health. And so I learned something about mental health. And again, how American society deals with it or tries to avoid dealing with it. But I've talked long enough, maybe a little too long.
Well, Dr. Pitts, I think everything that you shared has been really helpful to our audience. And thank you for helping us get a look back. And I'm sure I'm not alone in seeing a lot of those similarities that you talked about as someone who lived through Brown and everything that we're going through today. Is there any parallel that you really would like to make before we go to our next portion?
The main thing I would say is that, and this ties in very well with Deacon Linda, is that what is so controversial is that it's not just interpersonal, not just one-to-one. It also means that we get into difficulty in either facing or avoiding talking about how our society is organized and what its priorities are. And with social media, the way it has become pervasive, it's becoming more and more difficult to avoid finding out that we live in a society differently, that we have different idols. For some people, it's God and Jesus. For some other people, it's the color of their skin. That is, I'm white, and let's not, let's take that for granted and not ask the question of what does it mean to be white? And you can't fully understand being Black if you refuse to look at being white. That's all.
Thank you for that very compelling statement. Marta, would you like to share something before we open the floor for Shane?
I was just using the Zoom way of clapping for what he just said. That was all.
Thank you. I'm catching up. I think that we'll make space for grace and that we all have different levels of Zoom. Some of us speak Zoom better than others. And that is very much in line with what Shane Lunsford is going to share with us, and how so much of how we can connect and how we may actually have that dialogue internally and also with someone else is right now happening in what we call telehealth or telemedicine. So Shane, if you can please introduce yourself to our participants today, and then tell us a little about this new tool or very old tool that is getting a new kind of application in this time of COVID. Thank you.
And no, definitely. And thank you for having me on today. My name is Shane Lunsford. I am the Administrative Director for Psychiatry with the Mountain Area Health Education Center, what many of you know as MAHEC. Telehealth has actually been around since the 90s. And, due to insurance companies kind of slowly jumping on board, It's been really slow to catch on over the years, but in light of our recent COVID events, telehealth has kind of exploded. Everybody has gone from where, telehealth, we heard something about it, or we may have seen something online, or an ad come through Facebook or something like that to meet your doctor or meet a therapist, or different avenues, but it wasn't something we really engaged in. And now, most people, if they're engaging with a healthcare provider in today's day and age, since COVID struck, they are doing that through telehealth in one form or another. Telehealth has really opened doors for continuing to provide healthcare to the population, especially in rural areas such as ours, during these times where people just purely can't meet face to face or go see their provider face to face. This has given an opportunity for them to be able to continue their healthcare. And, actually, to be honest with you, a lot of folks find it easier to engage with their provider, whether that be mental health or primary care or one of the specialty cares through telehealth. We find most of our patients really enjoy being able to get on with their provider, not necessarily have to leave their home or their job, and be able to connect in a meaningful way to move their healthcare forward. Just to kind of give you perspective, we went from doing just a few hundred telehealth appointments in a month to now where we do, several hundred to over 1,000 a day, which is always exciting, when we can engage our patients in that manner and provide more access. So before we had situations where folks, couldn't make it into the office because of transportation or other barriers to care, and now those barriers are being overcome thanks to telehealth. So we're excited to have that. As we move forward, telehealth is going to look, different depending on how things shake out. Right now, the federal government has given a lot of leniency in how telehealth is delivered. So if you're connecting with your healthcare provider, it could be through FaceTime or through Zoom like we're on today, or through a telehealth application. And we expect some of that over the coming months as we see things continue on with COVID to subside and things to tighten back up a little bit. But it's also given a great opportunity for some of these applications that weren't necessarily in the telehealth space to become compliant from a security standpoint, to allow patients to securely connect in with their provider and not have to worry about others breaking into the phone call, or some of you guys may have heard things with some of the meeting platforms being invaded by ads or other things. And, I want to make sure that all the patient telehealth visits are secure and those aren't being shared with anybody, and nobody can break into those. So it's really important from a security standpoint for us. That kind of leads me into thinking about when we talk about myths and things like that within telehealth. Kind of like when online banking came into play. When online banking came into play, a lot of folks were really leery about online banking. They didn't want to enter their information, and now most everybody has an app on their phone where they can see their money and transfer it or whatever they need. And telehealth is much the same way. As telehealth has come around, we've had a long time to really perfect the security around telehealth. So you may be afraid that your session is going to somehow be leaked out there, or there's going to be other people that can get into the session or things like that. And with the level of security, that's just not the case in today's day and age, which is great. Sorry, that's all right. Sometimes my microphone gets tucked behind my collar, and so it becomes a little muffled. So, so outside of that, telehealth, there's lots of opportunities right now in that you can connect with your mental health provider in a very secure way in the time that you need it. Most of the providers out there are doing sessions, some of them are doing same day, some of them are able to do group therapy through telehealth. The one piece of advice that I would give folks that are out there that are dealing with issues related to COVID or just issues from everyday life. You know, a lot of folks haven't had the experience of being, you know, shut in their house with their kids or family members for, you know, a couple months on end. So, you know, that it does interesting things to folks' mental health. And I encourage you to reach out to your healthcare provider, your mental health provider, or if you don't have one, to find one. You know, because those sessions are available and they can meet you right in your home. If you don't want them to see what your home looks like, the applications have things where you can blur out your background, or you can find a nice place outside to have your visit. Don't let other barriers get in your way of engaging in your healthcare.
So Shane, I have two questions for you.
Sure.
Number one, in terms of that being able to connect. So, you know, it's great to hear that, you know, there are some tools to make this affordable for many different folks. I think what's also very key is social connection. So can you speak to how folks may be able to connect with someone that may have a similar lived experience or ethnicity or race, and how telehealth is really a way that mental health and wellness support can be available to more?
Yeah, definitely. So as I had mentioned, several of the folks that are out there are doing group therapy sessions, or creating collaboratives where folks with some similar diagnoses or similar backgrounds, similar cultural items can join in and really have experience, and they can share their lived experience within those groups. Another way that doesn't necessarily engage in the healthcare, but it definitely helps your mental health is using different other tele options. So there's different various Facebook groups or different other groups within the community. If you search online a little bit, a lot of times you can find opportunities to connect with folks. And it may not be something that you've connected with in the past, but it can be either an opportunity to rekindle some of those relationships or to form new ones to help you grow within the times that we're in.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
So next, I'd like to open and welcome Martha Alcala Williams. Again, Martha is with Asheville City Schools, as well as REI. And I will now let her share with us her work in race relations, equity, and student and parent engagement.
Thank you, Zoe. Thank you for inviting me. Thank you, Steve, Deacon, Dr. Pitts, for all of your words and everything that we have said thus far. So because our talk is about, let's talk about mind, body, and social justice in the time of COVID, I would need so much more time than what is allotted. So I will just try to do my best and say that I would want my part to start by saying that I've recognized that COVID has impacted us so differently, right? Depending on your race. And it was fascinating because at the beginning, several Black and brown people were saying, COVID's not for us. We're not even going to get it because that's not our thing, right? And then recognizing very quickly that it's like, oh, it's not hitting us as hard because we've had to practice social distancing all of our lives, right? Like, where am I allowed to go in? Where am I invited? Where can I be a part of something? So it wasn't as shocking or devastating as it was for folks living in white bodies, right? That it was like, oh my gosh, I have anxiety. I can't sleep. I forget to eat. I don't know what to do with my kids. Oh, this is so hard, right? And Black bodies were being shot, but it hit us differently with George Floyd because we also have a pandemic that can affect all of us, right? Blackness does not affect all of us. It does in the long run, but we don't have to think of it that way, right? So it's been really interesting to watch and listen to the stories of students, of parents that folks would think it would be different, that the Black and brown folks would be like, oh my gosh, we don't know what they're going to do. You know, the first 3 weeks, everyone was like wanting to get food for the families. What are we going to do? You know, and what about the kids that were part of the achievement gap? Now they're going to fall even farther behind. And it was really interesting because I wanted to say, well, where were you when they were falling behind inside the building? Why are you so worried about them now that they're in their home? Interesting, right? And when I asked the students, how are you feeling about at home learning? Not across the board, but many have said, I love it. I like being at home. I like doing the work in my pajamas if I want to. I don't have to worry about getting my hair done. The mamas are like, whoo, if you have 3 girls and you're Black, that's a big homework duty right there, right? To have to get hair done for 3 girls before you get out the door, right? But if you don't live it, you don't have to think about it. And I believe that that is part of so many of our issues. So I was so grateful when Dr. Pitt said about if you don't recognize about being white, right? And what that encompasses, how can you think of anything else? If it doesn't impact you, you could just say, yeah, I saw it on TV, or yeah, that was really rough, or that happened to my neighbor. With COVID, we can't say that because it can happen to any of us, right? So I've been able to see some of the resiliency in families, right? And then the white families at the beginning were very devastated and stuff are now kind of like coming together with Black and brown families. And it's like, let's learn from each other. How do you chill out on that Zoom call when your child is all over you and you just don't even blink? These are the Black families, right? And then the white mamas are kind of like, wait, excuse me, sorry, right? And I'm like, let's not. Let's just practice learning from each other how it is that we can all be together, because your liberation is tied with my liberation, right? Sometimes white folks don't know that if you are not protecting Black bodies, like Brian Stevenson says, right, then you can't be free. However, you just go about it differently, right? So right now, I just want us to just take a moment and think, when we are so worried about mental health for Black families, I want to just remind us, are we really talking about mental health or are we talking about trauma, right? Because when we're talking that we need more behavioral specialists for the Black students, are all the Black students having mental health? Are we, are Black and brown students biologically different? We're not, right? So what you're talking about is how to address the trauma of having to be in a building that you feel harmed every day, right? So some of the parents are saying now, one thing my child is not experiencing at home is racism, right? So what does that mean? What does that look like? If you get in trouble at home because you ate 1 cookie too many, I'm still gonna love you. We're still gonna be okay. We're gonna keep on going. I don't have to send you to the office. I don't send you away. I don't cause you to feel like you don't belong, right? And so it's been a learning experience for all of us to come together and really think about what is mental health, what is behavioral, what is trauma, and then what are we doing about it? When some of the Black moms have said to me, Miss Marta, we are chilling. We can rest because we don't ever get to rest, right? What am I going to do? Say, no, it isn't. That's not true. We have to listen. And so to me, this is a moment of when we're thinking about our mind and bodies, and some people don't know what to do with their bodies. A lot of Black and brown people are saying, we're resting. We do know what we're going to do with our bodies. And it is your turn to pay attention to how y'all are moving in the world, how quickly you're moving, how quickly you are harming Black and brown bodies, and to pay attention and to do things differently, right? And then I want to say to all of us on the call, panelists, participants, everyone, right? Like, if we all want to make the changes of the social justice piece, I just want to say, can we all just say to ourselves, where does white supremacy live inside of me? And how am I holding these structures in place? Where am I benefiting from them? Where am I moving things ahead or creating more paralysis? And we all have it because we all have been swimming in the disease. We've all been swimming in white supremacy culture. It doesn't make you the bad guy and me the good guy. It's like recognizing that. And I'll go ahead and say my own, right? I still to this day at 53, I groom Black and brown people to say, when you go in for that interview, make sure that you say it this way and you speak this way and you carry yourself this way so that you can get in the door. And sometimes my Black and brown friends will say, why can't I just be me? And I said, oh, you can be you, but you're not going to get in the door. Do you want in the door? And it feels a little gross to me that I still am doing that at 53. And then also recognizing that it's a thing, right? So practicing also where all this lies in our body and then working it through. Like I'll sometimes call a friend and say, hey, can we hum for 2 minutes? Can we shake it out? Can we take some deep breaths? Because I don't want to shove it anywhere anymore. I don't want to push it down because it will erupt at the wrong meeting or with the wrong person. But feeling it and then saying, can we work it through our bodies? Because the body keeps a score, right? Diabetes, high blood pressure, all of those things, right? The things that we wanted to call mental health. Well, if you create harm against me enough, it might look like mental health. And I'm not saying that mental health does not exist for Black and brown people, so please do not get it twisted. I'm just saying, let's focus and really pay attention to what is what. We don't get to decide that many of the Black students all have mental health issues because we don't know how to respond when a Black child says to you, I ain't gotta listen to you, you're not my mama. And then you feel afraid. These are not my stories. These are stories that were given to me to share, but it's from our community. It's from our parents, right? And I asked this several times so I could make sure that I was delivering them appropriately. And some of the parents might even be on this call, so they'll either get me if I didn't do it right, or they'll say, good job. That's what I have.
Well, I will say, Martha, thank you for your courage. Thank you for your candor. And thank you for continuing to be a connector to our student and our parent community, particularly for Asheville City Schools. One question that we have for you is if you could please share in terms of that lens of trauma, what can you share about this year's graduates within the school population? This is a very unique time for many seniors. And so I think that this question is about what exactly may you be able to share with us about their experience?
Well, when we're talking about resilience, let me tell you, we have some resilient seniors. And I feel very proud to say that I really am so excited about the way that Asheville City Schools came through for our seniors. We're checking in regularly. We still did interviews. We still had panels. I mean, we did as much virtually as possible. And then we also the principals put signs on each of the seniors' yards saying an outstanding senior, resilient senior lives in this home. Then we made the most beautiful graduation that you can make, in a time of COVID. And we actually said, it was more personable and you got to be up there on the stairs and have everyone in your family come through and squish them all in the cars and listening to their stories and having a picture with their name and where they're going to go to school. So yes, there's still a lot of losses and not at all, yes, you want a prom and you wanted your regular traditional graduation, yet what's it going to be like in the future when the seniors talk to us about June of 2020, right? And where they are now, that we'll have some doctors and lawyers and teachers and CEOs and so many things. Overall, I would say that I personally have not heard that anyone is like so devastated. There's a lot of sadness because you can't be with your friends because of the pandemic, but still having like Zoom parties and checking in and FaceTime and social distance walking and just working it through. And that goes across race. That it's just kind of like, how do we make it happen? How do we get together? How do we still make the best out of a very uncertain time?
Thank you. Well, I think many of us here at this panel are not strangers to understanding, how to get out of functional fixedness, or also taking our lemons and making lemonade. And one person that I think is really expert in helping us take challenges and really being able to pivot them to see them as opportunities is our next panelist, David Thompson. David Thompson is the Director of Student Services for Buncombe County Schools, and also a regional and statewide champion for the study and the community-based action around adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs. So if you can all welcome David Thompson. David, you are on mute. So if we can please give you a moment.
Right in the right place,
Yes, you are in the right place and we can hear you.
Thank you, Zoe. Appreciate the
You're
opportunity to be here. First of all, I want to start on this particular panel, and because of we were talking about both pandemics that we're experiencing right now, the pandemic that involves a virus and the pandemic that involves the virus of racism, and how that impacts us as a society as a whole, as a school district, as a community with each other. I also want to recognize that I come recognizing, Dr. Pitts, my whiteness, and that I am more susceptible to virus just because of my age, but I'm also I'm impacted by racism because I was a child of the 50s, 60s, 70s, and understand that. And the only thing I really know about being Black in America is from those conversations that Reverend McDowell was talking about, and understanding that. So as I come to you, I also want to talk about and kind of expand a little bit on what Marta was talking about the impact of both the pandemic and racism on what happens to us in our brains, and why this is an adverse childhood experience, and why our brain chemistry changes as a result of the stress and the trauma that it results from either of the viruses. That as we look at what those experiences are and what the brain does in response to those things is either to fight, to stand up for oneself, to make themselves heard, to run away, or to try to get out of situations, or to simply try not to be noticed, to try to make yourself small and try not to be noticed. Those are the brain responses to either of those viruses. And what we're seeing right now from our Black community is that they're tired of being not noticed. They're tired of having to make the effort to not be noticed, to not be heard. And I think there's a lot for us to learn as a school district about how to create those places. So to be able to feel that you can be heard, you have to be in a place where you feel safe to do that. And I think that is important for all of us to remember, that we have to create safe places for all of our students. And right now, those safe places have not always happened. So for us to take a close look and listen to those conversations, to be aware of how they impact us, but to be able to hear the voices of our students and the voices of our parents, to acknowledge those voices and not to try to come up with, oh, but this is what I think you should do, or here's what I think you should deal with. But listen to the solutions that our community brings to us about what needs to happen here is important for all of us to remember. even as we train our teachers for both coming back from either pandemic, we're talking about some basic strategies to put into classrooms where you begin with an inclusive welcome activity where that acknowledges the culturally relevant voices that come into the classrooms as being important and valued, to include the strategies that we know engage all students, but especially students of color, that look at movement and look at stories. You know, Dr. Pitts was talking about learning about racism from his parents' stories. I think the value of those stories coming into classrooms is really important for us to engage students in learning, whether that learning is academic, whether that learning is around social emotional skills, to engage those stories and what do we learn and what do we take out. That's how we create those resilient situations and those resilient human beings, is that you learn through stories, or you learn through very different techniques. And then very last, you know, we're talking about using something called an optimistic closure, which is not that little cheery, oh, everything's okay, run and go and do your thing. It is, what have you learned? What are you taking out? What more do you want to know? How does your experience as a Black person, a brown person, or a white person, how does that impact what you learn and what you take out of those situations? So those are things that we're trying to embed in that, as well as even looking at our own, a careful look at our own district policies. So what are those policies that sustain that structural racism? What are the, you know, what do we look at with discipline? What do we look at with those kind of things? How do we do business, and how do we do business differently at this point? So those are things that we'll have to take a very careful look at how we do and what we do, as well as teaching those social emotional skills about how to make sure that you are understanding, to be self-aware, to be socially aware, to be to do genuine problem solving and exploration, to do that emotional regulation, so that we are all talking to each other in respectful ways. So those are the things that we need to stress as we go forward as educators, and forward as a community. Actually, it's not just around education. It's what we all need to do in terms of understanding and hearing hearing each other's voice. So that's kind of where I'm coming from around building resiliency with equity in mind, looking at our instruction with equity in mind, looking at recognizing who each other are.
Well, thank you, David. And I do have a question for you, and I would actually want to extend this and give you the first round at responding. And it's that concept that you talk about is learning. We talk about learning as a way to understand complex issues, as a way to really even put together a plan forward. So can you tell us, and I would love to hear from all the other panelists, what does learning right now look like? And if you could reflect for you as an individual, and then also for our educators in Buncombe County Schools, what are we learning about the way to go forward in these recent 12 or so weeks?
I think that, you know, we're learning just in our planning process about bringing students back to school. We're learning about what it would take to create safe spaces, what it will take to engage in conversations that we need to have, how to communicate with each other in a way that demonstrates that we are talking about safety and equity for all. Those are the things that we are trying to create as we create a return to school and return to anything that looks like normal, that hopefully isn't the same normal that it was before.
Yes, Marta, if you can unmute.
Okay, thank you for that, David. I think there's so many new ways of doing learning, right? We have the virtual learning, and then we have even something Steve said earlier, right? That now you were going from saying, I don't know how many patients through telehealth, and now the numbers are, you know, exponentially growing. And so I would say that it's like you said, so not just learning in the building of a classroom and education, but for all of us as a collective, right? In the mental health and psychology and all of that, all of a sudden, right, we have a lot of Black families saying like, well, like Dr. Pitts explained, of the stigma of mental health for Black and brown folks, right? Yet we're saying, where are the Black therapists? Where are the Black therapists? Well, in Nashville, we don't have many Black therapists, right? But now we can access a Black therapist through Zoom, right? And so I'm just wondering, does it really require a pandemic for us to really move out of the box to reach all of us and support all of us in all the creative ways that we've been able to do it now during a pandemic? And that's why I think that we continually hear Black and brown people saying like, oh, I'm resting, like, oh man, finally the white people are working and getting it together and getting outside their boxes and not doing it a certain way. And it's a little bit funny, and then it's a little bit disheartening, right? That it had to be to this level for us to do learning differently. One of the things that has been really exciting for us with the kids is like, here's this book, you get to choose it, right? And the student chooses the book, preferably if you're a Black student, with an author of color and with characters of color. And if you're not, just whatever you choose, right? And then now if I said to you, so pick this book and you choose whichever one you want, then I would say, Zoe, when you read this story, how about if you let me know what you learned from it? Making a video, audioly, you can write about it, you can sing about it, you can write a poem, you can act it out, right? I've already given you 6 ways of letting me know that you understood this story, right? And we're having to do that. So now it's going to tap into my strengths of being able to tell you what I learned, right? What if we did something like that for all of us, right? What if in our workplace, our supervisors really were interested in seeing how we move, what makes us feel the best, right? That you walk in and I see you, I hear you, right? It's no different. So we're all having to grow and stretch. And what I hope is that we will continue growing and stretching and not more of this phase 2, phase something, let's open back up. And when I hear somebody saying back to normal, I'm like, was that normal? What we were doing pre-COVID, that was normal for whom? Right?
And
So I say
exactly.
that and I would feel really badly if I didn't say this in every Zoom call that I'm in and I am allowed to have some talking time, because I really want all of us to really be thinking about what we're truly asking for. And I hope that what we're truly asking for is a new way that supports all of us, right? And that when you are so concerned about the Black students, or when you're so concerned about the achievement gap for us, right? What is your place in all of that to support us in making it grow and for it to be beautiful? And that if it's with law enforcement, what are we collectively doing to put our voices up there, especially if you're a white person with power, to make it differently, right? That if it's in the healthcare, what does that look like? And this is the time. And if you need resources, I can connect you. And if we need equity coaches for white people, got them. If you need equity coaches for Black people, got it. Just seek me out and I will connect you so that we can do this thing right.
Well said. Thank you. And also want to acknowledge and thank you for all of the innovations that are coming out of our Asheville City Schools. And I did see a lot of nodding for Jim. Did you want to, or excuse me, Dr. Pitts, did you want to weigh in on what you are learning and seeing as a community resident, please?
Well, I'm reassured with lots of individuals in our community doing things differently, because to go back to the word that Zoe underlined, learning is fundamentally what makes us better humans. Now, we could become mean and spirit and all that, but I don't think that's going on. A lot of deep learning goes on outside of the classroom. And dealing with awkward situations, uh, listening carefully and finding out that listening to a person of a different race or sexual orientation can teach you something, that's powerful learning. So this notion of falling behind is in many cases narrowly focused on learning for a test, a standardized test. And there are times to study for the test, but we undervalue the learning that is individual, that comes from your person of your same age or of a different age. Deep learning is not limited. And the more we handicap our notions of, well, they can't learn because they're not necessarily in my classroom, the more we underestimate their capacity for learning. It's just that we don't have standardized tests for some of the most powerful learning, the spiritual learning, learning of compassion for other people, either individuals or whole groups, is powerful learning, but it will never be standardized. But it's the kind of learning that can improve your life and improve the life of someone else. So don't undervalue the irregularity of what we're confronted with.
So Shane and Deacon, can you please share what we're seeing in terms of learning in the clinic and also in our faith communities? What does learning look like in your two different but very similar organizational settings?
Yeah, I can give two different perspectives on this one. So from the clinical and healthcare side, every day is a new learning experience. There's been a very rapid transition for all of our providers, and we not only work with our providers at Maytag, but we work with practices all across the region, as well as independent healthcare providers. And it's been a time of transition. A lot of folks haven't done telehealth before. A lot of folks are finding new ways to engage patients, to help them be proactive and advocates in their healthcare. So that's exciting to see, and we're excited to be a part of that and helping folks to to really engage with people on a new level. Now on the flip side of it, I'm a father to currently 7 right now. We do foster care, so the number always changes here and there. And we did virtual kindergarten this year. We did virtual senior and high school this year. We did virtual college and virtual lots of things. And it's been interesting to watch across the lifespan of not only my kids but the folks that I interact with, and how they not only took to learning the educational material that's presented, but really how are they learning to keep those social and emotional connections? How are they connecting with their peers? How are they learning to stay connected with their religious organization? So watching my mother engage in church through Zoom and things of that nature. As a society, I think we've done very well. I think it's going to be an evolving process as we go along, but I'm really excited to see just just from a societal standpoint how well we've transitioned and engaged in trying to keep ourselves a part of society.
So Deacon, are you able to at least share? I'm not sure. I see that your video is turned off. We hear you, yes. Looks like you're back on.
Oh, yeah. Oh, so, learning, I think about is listening. There is so much information that is going through our environment right now. Are you retaining anything? Listening from that. And I'll use an example. When this first started, I was invited to get on Zoom. But my problem was that we were going to be on Zoom with an avatar. Papers say that I am 3/5 of a person. I am trying to be humanized. And yet I was being reduced to an avatar. The fact that you're here, information, what are you going to do with it? And pray, please understand there is an action with that prayer. Just to send them up there and do nothing. So when we look,
Sorry, we're having a little bit
you
of,
see that. So what are we really learning and what are we doing with the learning? You know, I say often, God, get your children, get your all
sorry,
our
we're
thoughts
having a
of
little
that,
issue.
because
Can't hear.
Sorry, Deacon, want to see if we might be able to have some slight adjustments on your audio. Not sure if there's a mobile phone very close to your phone, or possibly if you may be able to just move 1 or 2 inches to your left or right. And we'll see if that clears up.
ugh,
Are you there, Deacon?
yeah. Can you hear me?
Yeah, it's coming in and out. Not sure if you are on speaker or if you have a Bluetooth device. It's just been a little bit metallic. So can we try once again, please?
I'm not sure what's going on.
That's actually perfect. Yes, that made a huge difference. Thank you. And sorry for the interruption.
Okay. I think that basically that we just need to take a time, you know, there's a lot going on and with a lot happening, and we be in a get it right. But I've lived long enough to see, have seen us rush into situations and rush to an answer. There's no quick answer in this. You know, racism didn't happen overnight and it's not going to go away overnight. The learning is, what do you as an individual want? What do you want? And where are you putting your passions? You know, for again, the Christians, we pray a lot. Now that we prayed, let's get up and get busy. There has to be action. Willing to make that happen. So if we're listening and we're learning what needs to be done, we need to get busy.
Well, thank you. And so in terms of getting busy, I want to now open up the floor for all of us to respond. However, this question is really geared to our schools. However, I imagine other folks would likely have a perspective or opinion. This question is, is there consideration for removing police from schools and instead adding for mental health support and more Black and brown teachers?
Let me take that one on a little bit from the beginning. I think we have to look at why we started having our SROs in buildings to start with. Let's go back to the history and what caused that. And it was really after Columbine and shootings that really were external threats to students' safety. And the history certainly has not gotten much better over time in terms of the numbers and frequency of those shootings and those things that happen over time. So the original idea was never to be, for our SROs, to be those disciplinarians, or not to be involved with the discipline and the structure of what the schools do, but to be there for safety. And I think if you listen to Sheriff Miller talk about the role of SROs, he much more focuses on the relationship building, the listening and relationship building, and connecting with students. So I think there are probably conversations that are going to be had about what those folks do and how they happen. But I don't think that we've not had the conversations about removing them, but also just about what their functions are and how they're there. And yes, we are looking at adding more mental health supports in place. MAHEC, Shane sitting here, we're working with MAHEC in a little while to integrate MAHEC to provide some additional mental health services and integrate those services with our school nurses and in a more meaningful way, and with our school staffs, and really coordinate those things together. So we're really looking at adding some supports. Love to have even more school counselors, school social workers, but we kind of depend on the legislature to let us do that one, and we'll see what happens there. But those are the things that we're doing. But no, we have not had the conversations, but we've also not had that opportunity at this point yet to do that. Marta, I don't know what the Asheville City's response is.
So thank you, David, for giving the history, because we have very similar stories of how this even came to be, why we have the SROs. We are having some of the conversations because we are receiving phone calls and such. And I don't believe we're at a place where I've heard that this is something that is not going to happen. What I heard is that our SROs have really good relationships with our students. And then adding the mental health component that I think was part of the question, Black and more Black and brown teachers. So that's definitely on the table. And about even community members, right, that can support in that way with the adverse childhood experiences, right? You don't have to have a title or a degree to be able to relate to me and let me know that you care about me and that I'm going to respond well. Sometimes we just get into the boxes of, well, what's her degree? What's his title? What is his blah, blah, blah? We have barbers that support students better than a therapist, right? But we get into the naming and the hierarchy and all of that. So like when we're talking about learning, that's why I say that learning is not just in the building or for the students, it's for all of us. It's so how are we going to do things differently in our school buildings, in mental health, right? When we hear more telehealth, and I just said, now we can access more Black therapists. And what are the white therapists being asked to do differently so that you could reach out to Black and brown people, right? Because if you're providing therapy for me and you have no lived experience, or you don't know how my life is, and you think that you do know because you read a book or you took a class, then you could be causing me harm and I'm paying you, right? So those are things that, it's not a gotcha. It's like, how do we all really think about, if I were a white therapist, right? And I would be in this call, I'm going to make pretend, right? Because I can't be that, to say like, that's a really good point. What does it look like for all of us together to hear what that really looks like? What are Black and brown families really saying that would be beneficial in order for me to provide the appropriate support? right? Those are things that to me feel revolutionary and are not that big of a deal. We just have to take the time. And right now we've had the time because we've had to be home for 2 months, right? So I want to invite all of us to get those muscles and be kind of like, whoa, that is so real. What can we be doing differently now, right? Having more Black teachers. Why? Because it's important, because it's, and because we want to have teachers and staff that resemble the demographics of our school system, right? That we want to have doctors that resemble our demographics, that we want to have more people of color being part of the moving and growing society so that we can all be in this together, not to be looked at differently all the time. And especially in such a progressive liberal town, right? We really need to look at those pieces. It's super important.
So I know, when we look at, things from a therapy standpoint and, within the schools, as we, just as David said, venture into that space, supporting our school nurses and growing the mental health services within the schools, we take a very focused effort to actively try to recruit, therapists and providers of color, as well as, different, different various backgrounds. Because we want that to be representative of the population that we serve, and because it does make a difference in the connection that's made. I really want to see more folks coming into the area that can provide those services. And right now we're it's hard to find a therapist of color within the area. So hopefully we'll have some success in being able to bring more providers into the area.
I agree with everything that's been said, but I just want to add for the listeners that a Black child does not require a Black teacher to learn. The effect of having a good Black teacher, a person who is Muslim or whatever, is on the whole environment. It sort of signals that everyone belongs here. And it took many years before I got to Black teachers other than my parents. But I learned from white teachers who were good and who were interested in me. And I think it works the same way for other human beings. It's important, but we don't have to wait until the numbers go up to a certain level for it to kick in.
Thank you.
I think Marta hit the nail on the head earlier, in saying that ultimately at the end of the day, it's about the connection. It's about our connections and how those matter. When we take and we make an active effort to connect with every child or every learner, within the environment, regardless of race, age, religion, anything. So.
Yeah, see those connections, or the importance of connections. And David, what you've shared about adverse childhood experiences and the brain and remaining connected in the classroom environment. And also to you, Deacon, with your conversations as a tool for us to be connected. Do either of you want to weigh in on a tool before we proceed to the closing portion of our webinar?
Would you repeat the questions though, please?
It's really to share a tool, as you all have been sharing some perspectives into how we might do this work differently. And so how might this appear differently for our communications as we connect in a spiritual or church environment, and then also for you, David, in thinking of the connections and how it may be different as in a perspective of a learning environment and the brain for our youth.
Well, as people are thinking, I'll just go ahead and piggyback on something Dr. Pitt said with not needing to have a Black teacher to learn. And I put on the chat that I do agree. You just have to want to teach and engage the student. And we do have many right teachers. I mean, I want to say at Asheville City Schools, we do have a lot of teachers that genuinely see and want all the kids to thrive and grow and succeed. So I don't want this to sound kind of like bad teachers, they don't love our Black kids, right? I'm just saying that it's a both and. When students ask you like, I like, how come we only have white teachers or things like that, that the families also recognize that. And I'm not from Asheville, but I've lived here 30 years and I hear that there was a thriving community back when of Black teachers, and you live in my community and we went to the same church and stuff. And so there's that longing for that piece too. And so I just wanted to clarify for Dr. Pitts that I'm not saying we need 50% Black teachers and 50% white. I'm saying let's really be intentional about what that looks like, because kids are paying attention, right? And when kids say, I want to be the principal of my school, and they see a Black principal and they're Black, it kind of makes that connection. And if you almost all the time see that is, not the positions of power, then sometimes that's when we have a lot of kids saying, I'm going to be a football player, I'm going to be a rapper, I'm going to be a this, which is not okay. It's just like, let me at least have the opportunity to see people that look like me in positions that are going to move things forward. And I don't even want to say in power, but of leadership, right? Of true leadership. So I wanted to clarify that. And also that I am not a director of REI, but I am on the group of REI, so that if Dina or Monica are in here, be like, oh, you are? How come you're not traveling with us? I'm just kidding. But definitely very committed to Racial Equity Institute and the racial equity work in our community with amazing leaders. And really just want to encourage everyone, if you have not been through that training, to please do it. Not because all of a sudden you're going to be woke, but then we have a shared analysis to even really begin to have the conversations. And I'm happy to share resources with you, Zoe, if then you're going to email folks out on ways that white folks can move to social justice in a way that you're recognizing your privilege and how sometimes inadvertently you hold these systems in place, but also growing together for that liberation. And then for us as Black and Brown people, healing spaces and how we need to do our own work on all that has impacted us for so long that sometimes we're just not even aware, right? We have anti-Blackness with the Latinx community. We have so many pieces that we have to work on ourselves, or those of us that have made it, the PhDs of Black people and stuff or whatever, we also have to, I don't have a PhD, but we have to undo some of that yuckiness in order to be free too, because sometimes we are so infected with that narrative. If we made it, that I don't know why my cousin didn't get out and do it, I did it, and it's kind of like that is as damaging as the other. And so we really have to be looking at all of those pieces so that we can all feel, right, that we are having our mind, body, soul, and this healing all together.
Thank you, Martha. So we have a quick question in the chat. Are they going to, and I think we can also follow up in this, if you can just put it into the chat, if you have a link. Are there going to be any trainings for REI for Asheville City School teachers over the summer?
Oh, I'm not sure if over the summer, because we're, we have to get 50 people into a room and they're sitting pretty close. So I don't know that we are there yet. Like we were supposed to have one May 28th and 29th, and they did say, hey, are y'all having it? And we were just not there yet. Is that you, Daisha, that is asking that? I think. But it's definitely going to happen as soon as we're able to open in a responsible way and all of the things that will keep us safe from COVID. Then the answer is yes, we will be intentionally looking for funding of all of our community to ensure that we all can have that shared analysis. And I hope that mental health will, and law enforcement will, or whatever. But then it's like, how do we continue it, right? With caucusing and continuing to work, and equity coaches,
Exactly.
because a 2-day training is not going to change it or make you equified.
Yes. So thank you for that. And yes, training alone is not enough. David, did you want to add anything to this perspective of, informing and giving lift and capacity to our workforce?
Absolutely. I mean, we would want and encourage more of our Black and Brown teachers in our community. We would even ask with the community to help us in recruiting, because we've had a hard time recruiting and sustaining. And sometimes it's because they feel like they are alone within a white building of only white teachers, and we've not done a good job of supporting. So, and some of that is because that sometimes it's that they don't feel that they find a place in community when they move here. So it is part of both of those things that I hear as I talk to our Black teachers and counselors who come to us and then leave. And I've asked many of them, why are you leaving? And those are the responses that they provide. So I think we have to recognize that, but we also have to look at, as I stated earlier, if we're going to create safe spaces within buildings, that we all feel safe and secure when we see people who are like us. That helps to create that sense of safety and security within a place. And so I think it's incredibly important that we do everything we can to recruit and sustain and keep those folks here and keep them involved with both our schools and our community, and to have them in places where they are demonstrating leadership. Completely agree with what Marta was talking about.
Thank you. And for all of those who are listening, this is what we talk about in workforce development as retention. We often talk about recruitment. There's a little bit that we've talked about promotion, but it is really, I think, David, what you are bringing the point up is, how do we retain? And that is something that is really happens beyond the walls of the schools, but it's really I think talking about that retention of families who have different ethnic and racial backgrounds. And so I think when we talk about retention, we're also talking about belonging. And so Deacon McDowell, I'd like to now turn that to you, as I think that you quite often, you are really great in helping frame what it means to belong. And in our conversations, we've talked about how that is a really key way for us to really think about all of this mind, this body, this social justice, and this human connection that we're all after. Can you please give us some grounding before we close today's webinar, as we are a little bit past time, but we do very much appreciate everything that you offer to give us really great nuggets as we go forward.
Growing up, I often heard, get into a church, a Bible believing church. We know that the church has done a lot of damage. So I'm just going to have to brag on being an Episcopalian all my life, that social justice is real. Social justice is real in the Episcopal Church. And I was a member of the Dismantling Racism Workshop leaders for about 15 or 20 years. A church that walks the walk and talks the talk, be there. You should have programs in your church that says we live in a world that's different and we appreciate the world that we live in. You need to be in a church that word is coming from the pulpit, not telling you one way or another, but getting you to look at what is happening in the world. You should be in a church that when they say we want to be Christ-like, we know what that means. We need to be in a church that is about people, that is about diversity, that is about union. But we have to also understand, when we start talking about church and we start talking about being one, that means somebody is about to be unemployed. So all of these things that we look at of being one, we can't be one without another one feeling less than. They feel less than because we've not done the work of inclusion. That is a real work. You should be intentional about your inclusion. Not that we just want you here so that we can look good to the community. We want you here because we're walking the walk, talking the talk, and we are about, in fact, justice. In fact, restorative justice, where that is in the people's hand. I think to be Christ-like, we have to get on the ball, again, walk the walk and talk the talk, not that I'm just blessed.
Thank you so much. Do any of our other panelists want to have a final word of goodbye and connecting before we close? You are all welcome.
Thank you, everyone. I appreciate it, and especially for folks that hung in there. I saw that our numbers went down a little, but that's okay. Sometimes
Yeah.
we have
Good
other
seeing
things
you
in
guys.
mind.
Good seeing you all.
Thank you.
Jim, would
Thank
you
you
like to
all.
share? And Jim?
Thanks for including me. And I enjoy the experience of these topics and these personalities. And it's a blessing to be involved.
Well, thank you all for lending your expertise and all of your experiences as community members, and also as providers and professionals in the space. And we thank all of those participants who joined this conversation. The archive of this will be available on our Facebook as well as on Buncombe County. And you all can anticipate a re-airing of some of this audio on our local 100.7 WRES local community signal. So thank you all, and we invite you to join future Let's Talk conversations produced by Buncombe County government. Thank you. This concludes our webinar, and please, for everyone in our community, be well, stay safe, and remember, we are still all working to promote the 3 Ws. So see you soon.
Right.